Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, the co-host. Daniel, nice to see you today.
Good morning.
What do we have on the schedule?
Well, I'm afraid it's bad news for you. You got to be on the hot seat again. Everyone loves to ask you questions, and I think we both enjoy it. We like to interact with our viewers, and so we did another Ask Ron Paul today, and I put up the hashtag on Twitter earlier today, and we got a lot of responses. So we picked our top few. So
the frustration must be is how do you pick them? And because there are so many good questions.
There are a lot of good questions.
Yeah, okay, so let's see what we have.
Let's go to number one right away without any pause. And this comes to us from Jacob Allen Utley, who asks, would you be in favor of completely removing health care? Should Obamacare be repealed and not replaced?
Well, the easy answer, the correct economic answer, the correct constitutional answer is the government shouldn't be involved. They have no authority to do it. But you don't want to imply the loss of medical care. Actually, you provide better medical care if we get the government out of the way. And what they're going through now is, a big mess in Washington. It's so politicized, and they're not talking about the answer because they can't address it. Should the government be doing this? And the answer is no. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to correct all the mistakes made with government being involved in medical care, especially since 1965, even before that they were starting to get involved. But Medicare and Medicaid came out in 1965, and it's a mess. It costs too much. It's unfair. The people who don't need it have to pay more. Obamacare just was a total disaster, took a very bad situation and made it much worse. So they're trying to take a situation which is philosophically driven, that is that the government shouldn't be involved in delivery of medical care, and solving it with more tinkering. It's a bureaucratic monster, and they think that if they use a little bit of changes, that they can make this worse. Protect this group, but not this group. Penalize this group, and the mess was the most current mess was, of course, Obamacare. But the bigger problem is there's no philosophic defense by either the Republican leadership or the Democrats that we shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be in this mess, and therefore they think they have to tinker around. But some of the real problems of Obamacare is real, in a sense that it's almost impossible to say, well, I don't care about them. Take for instance, the total dependence on government, and how do you transition away from it? We had a tax code that encouraged people to get all their insurance, through the company they work with, rather than providing it for themselves and having a continuation of a policy. So it lost its image of insurance. There's no insurance. They call it a government insurance program, but it doesn't function as an insurance company. So therefore, they think that, well, we just have to change the rules, penalize another group, and it's all going to be okay. But unfortunately, it's going to get much worse because they can't put this back together. I mean, what are they? They're talking about another vote. And if they do get a vote, the Senate has to go through and the president has to sign it, and it will not solve the problem. And if you just look at the history of the Republican Party, why should you expect them to do it? They were instrumental in getting all this mess started, and they were instrumental in expanding it with prescription drug program. So they don't philosophically believe that the market can deliver medical care. They've lost confidence. The people have lost confidence in that people would be taken care of, and they've lost the desire to understand how the market works. And they could say, well, it's never happened before. Government always, an advanced civilization, the government has to take care of medical care. Well, before 1965, it worked pretty well in this country. It wasn't the people clamoring for this. It was the people who were clamoring for votes because they were going to give something for free. So, no, you should, but it's not likely to happen. The only way I could see for them to work a transition would be to set the goal and legalize freedom of choice. Let the people get out. But I've heard the liberals on TVs just preach the gospel. Oh no, we need the healthy people in this, the people who don't need to pay this much, because they have to pay for the people who have abused their health and have been smoking, and who would take care of them if the healthy people didn't do this. So it's a real mess. But that was established; those rules were established. This whole idea of the guarantee that people with a previous condition is a consequence of government regulation. So we have to eventually move out. Maybe there could be a condition, which I don't expect to happen, is you take care of those people who are totally dependent and legalize the freedom of choice. Let the people who will take care of themselves get out of the government system and let them deduct everything they spend on medical care from their income tax. And then you would narrow down the number of people that have to be taken care of. But right now, neither the Republican leadership nor the Democratic leadership have any desire to do that. So this is going to be much worse, and medical care is going to get a lot worse. And unfortunately, that is really going to be harmful to the patients. We need to get rid of Obamacare, plus a lot more government interference.
All right. Well, that's solved.
Yeah, there you go.
And let's move on to the next big problem, number 2. Is brought to us from Hector Montiel Romero, who wants to know, what would you do with NAFTA? It's in the news lately.
Well, I think our president mentioned NAFTA in the campaign, and I thought he had a pretty good idea. We don't need NAFTA. And, it's interesting that these so-called free trade agreements, these multinational agreements, whether it's WTO or whether it's NAFTA or CAFTA or any one of these things, the libertarians split on it and saying, well, they're designed to lower tariffs. And every once in a while they do, but every once in a while they put tariffs on, and it's just a battleground for regulation of letting the big companies get what they want, and it's very much politicized. I don't consider it free trade. So I voted against all these international agreements. A couple reasons. It's managed trade, it's not free trade. And also is because it abused the principle in the Constitution that foreign trade and foreign commerce was a responsibility of the Congress, not the responsibility of the president or an international body. And generally speaking, fast track means you're delivering authority to the executive branch unconstitutionally. You can't amend the Constitution by just saying, okay, Mr. President, you can take care of it. It's very much like the principle, okay, Mr. President, we sort of don't want to declare war, but you go fight the wars and we'll provide you the money. They skirt their responsibilities. So NAFTA, we don't need NAFTA. I'm not quite sure exactly the administration's position right now, but I do know that if you're for free trade, you can be very confident that getting rid of the international trade agreements is not an anti-free trade position. So that is, I think, the most important thing. But also, if you want to be a believer in free trade, which freedom is all about and is good economic policy, is that you don't put on a bunch of tariffs at the border, because what you want is trade. Trade, of course, enhances the prosperity of both sides of the equation. So that is what we should aim for. That is what the founders intended to have, was more free trade, although they had a loophole in there for some tariffs. It was never meant to be internationally managed and to manipulate to protect certain industries. It was designed originally for a token raising of revenues. But I would think there could be a pretty strong argument that we shouldn't be raising revenues that way. We should have free trade, which means it's very easy. If you believe in freedom, if you believe in prosperity, you won't believe in tariffs and protectionism, and you won't believe in these international trade organizations, which just encourages bigger government and more intrusive bureaucratic government.
All right. And the third one we have is a foreign policy question. It's from Aymal Faizi, and he asks, how can sending more U.S. and NATO troops to Afghanistan help the situation? Have no lessons been learned from past mistakes?
Unfortunately, I think he's on the right track. No, we haven't learned any lessons. But in the past mistakes, that doesn't just mean, recently. It doesn't mean just back to the Soviets' mistakes. It's back to thousands of years, and Afghanistan's become known as the graveyard of empires. So I guess that's where the American empire is going to be buried at the rate we're going. It makes no sense why they can't look at that and say, it doesn't work. Just send more troops. I mean, you could argue the same case with Iraq. So interventionism and this whole idea that we can change governments, people just don't understand what Afghanistan is like. I didn't spend much time in Afghanistan, but I did travel through there when I was in the military. And probably not much has changed in the last 50 years because they were telling me then, this is the way it was 500 years ago, and described the incidents when the British would come in and try to take it over. And it never works. So I would say quit wasting our time, money, and energy, and just stay out of the business. Let the people in Afghanistan decide it. Yes, they would be far from perfect, but if anybody wants to claim that what we're doing is perfect for the Afghans and wonderful for the American taxpayer and the American people and for the families who lose loved ones, or the families who have their members injured and maimed in these kind of wars. So I would say, yes, they haven't learned a single thing. But that's part of the reason we have our program, is trying to get people to understand that you're not unpatriotic. It's not un-American to say that we will defend our country. Nobody should mess with us, but we are not going to tell which faction in a country like Afghanistan should run their country. The greatest motivation of the Taliban is not to come here. They don't leave Afghanistan. All they want are the foreigners out, and they're motivated. So in the technical sense, they have the moral high ground because they're fighting to protect their homeland. And you say, well, they live in the dark ages. They're not modernized. They don't have true elections and this sort of thing. Well, and they say they have this ruthless laws that we don't endorse. Well, neither does Saudi Arabia. And we don't wring our hands every day about Saudi Arabia. We might on this program, but the people who endorse and support Saudi Arabia know about Afghanistan. We got to have elections there and make sure they follow our rules. Total waste of time. It's unconstitutional, and the results have been lousy. You'd think we'd learn a lesson by now.
All right. Now this is a third question is similar to an earlier one. People want to know what you want to do. The third one is from Ali Meklai, who says, "What would you replace the Federal Reserve with?"
Oh boy. Well, how about nothing? It's sort of like, what do you replace income tax with? I suggest that might be the same answer. But no, the Federal Reserve, it was not established by the founders. The idea of a central bank was known back then, and Jefferson and Hamilton fought it out. They was called the National Bank, and they had the National Bank, First National Bank, and the Second National Bank. And in our early history, we got rid of them because it was always serving the interest of the privileged bankers. But they have always concocted problems financially by manipulation of money, especially in the Civil War period. So there were booms and busts, but it had nothing to do with capitalism causing this. It had to do with the manipulation of money and credit. So central banking is the evil. You don't need a central bank. You need people to have an honest currency. And if you do have a limited influence of the government on the monetary system, it should be to define the monetary unit and as a weight of a precious metal. And the founders did this. They said only silver and gold could be legal tender. So that's the essence of what the government should be involved in. And they should prohibit. There should be laws against fraud and abuse. And yet the government becomes the counterfeiters. They counterfeit the money, and they go and then they commit the fraud by bailing out all the people who made a lot of money off this system. It's a wicked system when you think about how many people just get super rich over this financial system, and then when they get into trouble, then the average person has to go and bail them out, and that's what's happening. And this, of course, is the reason the middle class eventually gets wiped out. It's because of the manipulation of the monetary system. And if we since we're not going to likely in the near future, though we'll continue to argue the case that we should, get out and get rid of the Federal Reserve and repeal the Federal Reserve Act, it's not going to happen. It'll probably end the way our foreign adventurism will end. It'll be by total failure. So when the system fails, it usually fails with runaway inflation, and then the governments and the politicians have to redesign a monetary unit. And sometimes they do better than at other times. We did it once after the Civil War, and it went smoothly. We were off the gold standard for 15 years or so, and we went back on, and it was a non-event. So that could happen theoretically, but it's not likely to happen. So when the central bank fails, like take what we had in 2008 and 2009, and maybe quadruple that problem, or a tenfold increase in the size of that problem, which is possible because the bubble and the distortions are so much greater right now. I mean, this will be a major event, and that's when the markets overrule and they adjust the real value of paper money, and people then resort to all kinds of things. They resort to barter. They resort to actually using real money, gold and silver, and who knows, maybe there'll be the use of cryptocurrencies, but once again, governments can control that internet and cryptocurrencies as well. But ultimately, the country will be forced, at least in appearance sake, to go back to honest money. But you don't want to replace it with another central bank, similar to the question about Afghanistan. There's so many mistakes made, so much special interest. It breeds too much spending, too much debt, welfare warfare. And that's what the Fed does. That's their job. And to provide grand profits for the military-industrial complex. You'd think people would look at that and say, hey, that's not such a good system. And we're really hurting the people. And, they talk a lot about providing good health care for everybody, and all they do is add more money to it, thinking that'll do it and let the Fed print the money, not realizing the Fed is related, it's very much related to the runaway welfareism and runaway warfareism. So if the goal is peace and prosperity, you cannot have a central bank printing money, monetizing debt, for the benefit of the very powerful special interest bankers, foreign governments, and foreign concerns, and globalism. The evidence is there. We should wake up and say, yes, maybe we can't get rid of it tomorrow, but the time is coming. We will get rid of the Federal Reserve, and we will be prepared to replace it with sound money, which was instituted and originated with the founders of this country, and it's in the Constitution and speaks clearly to that.
Okay. Now here's a slightly related one. It comes to us from Sean O'Meara, and he asks, do you think Irving Schiff's argument against taxation was legally sound?
Yes, I do. It's difficult, and you have to look at it in detail because there was the 16th Amendment, which legalized it. But if you study the ratification of the 16th Amendment, there's a lot of questions on whether they ratified it legally. There was a lot of shenanigans going on, and quite frankly, I think he was probably right that it was not technically legal the way they ratified it, but it's there, it's on the books, and they've been following the 16th Amendment as passed, so that becomes a very difficult argument, and it's not going to go to courts and all of a sudden the 16th Amendment is going to be thrown out. I mean, if they cheated and got the 16th Amendment passed back then, it would never be repealed and removed because it was brought about illegally. But what should be challenged, and a little bit more likely we could challenge the unconstitutionality of the income tax, is the way the revenues are collected, because we all are forced to do the bidding of the government. We become the slaves to the government, keep all our records, and then turn them over to the government, and then we are guilty until we prove ourselves innocent, no matter what the government says. So it has nothing to do with a process where you can go to court and they have to prove guilt. No, it's a terrible system. It's an intimidation. The income tax has been used politically against certain interests. So I would say that I certainly agreed with just about all the arguments that Irwin Schiff made. But the real tragedy is he stood his ground. He knew he was correct, a lot more correct than any of the politicians in Washington, and argued the case. And he was sentenced to a life imprisonment, essentially, and died in prison. And the main thing was the state, the government, the collectors of our revenues, the people who control us, couldn't stand the idea of somebody telling the truth, because they will not tolerate people who challenge the financial system, the Federal Reserve, nor do they tolerate anybody who challenges the income tax. And that, to me, is a sad state of affairs. And certainly, if there was a lot more respect and understanding about the Constitution, yes, Irwin Schiff would have been a hero rather than somebody that had to die in very bad conditions because he stood up for the Constitution.
Almost done, Dr. Paul. We've got one final one, and it's an interesting one as well. This comes to us from Jack Huntley, and he asks, what are your views on states' rights when a state violates the Constitution? Should the federal government interfere?
Well, the federal government should if it has the authority, but if they don't have the authority, they shouldn't do it. And technically, the original Constitution, there was very little that the federal government should be involved with, because there were some states at the time of the Constitution being written that had statewide religions. They endorsed a religion, and that was accepted, and it wasn't a First Amendment issue at all. And that wouldn't be accepted today because attitudes have changed and the states would have changed. So yes, you could do an awful lot with an awful lot less government. The federal government, could, have some authority over interstate trade and interstate travel, because mostly on trade. But the whole purpose of the Interstate Commerce Clause was to make sure there were no barriers, that there was free trade among the states, but it turned into an excuse to regulate everything. So the federal government has very little authority under the Constitution, but because we have not protected that principle, now we have the environmentalists, that say that since they own a third of the country, and even the part that they don't own, that they can regulate everything and anything on construction or highway building or whatever. It just wasn't authorized by there. So on a very, very narrow sense, the government cannot and should not override the state laws. I mean, there shouldn't be any force by the federal government for a state to say provide medical care. And if they didn't do it, they shouldn't be subject to the government. But what happens is the states are always sucked into the federal government by giving them lots of money. And then the federal government, they don't defend it on constitutional grounds. They say, you do it our way or we're going to take away your money. And that's the same thing that's going on with Obamacare right now. So there's not much clear understanding nor desire to make sure that the states acted as independent countries, essentially, as was intended. It's clear, especially in the Declaration of Independence, that we were not one country as much as we were independent, coming together loosely for certain purposes such as trade and military defense. So I think that the less federal government intervention at the state level and on the level of us personally, the better. The least, the better.
Well, Dr. Paul, that was 6 tough questions in under half an hour. So that's you deserve a break. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Daniel, for providing those great questions for me. And I want to thank the audience for tuning in, because I've always been frustrated when I read some of the blogging. Sometimes its frustration is I can't thank so many people who are so generous in the compliments of our program. And then there are other times where there's really a lot of confusion. I wished I could sit and answer them, which I don't have enough time for. And then, of course, there's the ones that are highly critical. I need to straighten that guy out. But I let other people do that, and others do a pretty good job on that. But I do want to thank our audience, because without the audience that we have and our viewers, there's not much to the program. But I enjoy doing the program. I enjoy visiting with you, and I hope answering these questions are helpful. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.